I was leaning against the edge of the sink, the cool porcelain pressing into my forearms as I rinsed the last dish from breakfast, a chipped white coffee mug that still bore the lip stain from too many early mornings. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the dishwasher and the faint drip of the faucet, but then Kira's phone blared to life on speaker, slicing through the silence like a startled bird. I froze mid-wipe, heart stuttering as I recognized the clipped, urgent tone in her mother Gloria's voice. Monday, 9 a.m. Notary's office. I'm selling your cottage. I've already taken the advance from the buyers. You just need to be there. The phone clicked off before Kira could respond, leaving her standing beside me with a wooden spoon still in her hand and a look of stunned confusion plastered across her face. I could feel the hot rush of blood into my neck, the way the air in my lungs seemed to tighten. Our cottage, our haven, was being sold by the one person who had no right to touch it. I set the dish down more forcefully than I intended, rattling the plates stacked beside me. The clang of porcelain on metal felt harsh and final, a bell tolling the end of safety I hadn't even realized I'd been clinging to. I glanced over at Kira, eyes wide, mouth agape, as though she were unable to process what had just happened. Her cheeks were pale, her knuckles white against the wooden handle of the spoon. She can't do that, I said, my voice quiet at first, but then rising, a crescendo of disbelief and fury. It's our cottage. A gift from her father before he died. I stared at Kira, seeking some spark of certainty in her expression, but all I saw was that flicker of doubt, that shadow of uncertainty gathering behind her eyes. Kira swallowed, stepping back as though the words themselves might strike her. She let the spoon clatter into the sink, the noise echoing louder than any shout. I don't know, she whispered, voice trembling. Her hands shook as she reached for a dish towel, twisting it in her fingers as if it could somehow absorb the confusion clouding her mind. I wanted to reach across the counter and grab her, hold her solid through the suffocating knots in my chest, but something in her posture told me she needed space to breathe. Instead, I crossed my arms and let the silence stretch between us, the morning sun slanting through the window and catching dust motes as though microcosms of the world floating aimlessly in a shaft of light. The cottage had been Kira's sanctuary long before we met. I remembered countless stories she'd told me. How, as a girl, she climbed over that creaky gate, the same one we used now when we drove up on weekends and breathed in the pine-tinged air for the first time. She described the soft hush of the birch trees that surrounded the little A-frame cabin, the way dawn slipped across the lake like a glassy promise. It's where Grandpa's stories live, she used to say, her eyes shining, where I can still hear his laughter echoing off the water. That place was magic for her, a living memory of a grandfather's love and a childhood defined by warmth. She had inherited it when she turned 21, before we married, and we'd promised never to let it slip away. But now the promise lay shattered between us, and I could feel that shift deep in my bones. Memories of lazy summer days spent fishing just off the dock, of fireflies dancing in the twilight as we sipped hot cider from flannel mugs, pressed themselves to the back of my eyelids, and I fought to keep from letting them flood over me. I swallowed hard, willing the lump in my throat to subside. Did she say why? I asked, voice rough. Kira shook her head, an involuntary shiver rippling through her. She put down the towel and wrapped her arms around herself, as though she were trying to hold the pieces of her composure together. No explanation, she managed. Just that everything was settled. That I was supposed to show up Monday morning with the original deed to finalize it. Tears welled in her eyes, though she blinked rapidly until they vanished. I wondered whether those tears were for herself, or for the cottage, or perhaps for us. I set my jaw and met her gaze, trying to convey a sense of confidence we neither of us felt. Okay, I said steadily. We'll go. We'll find out how she did this. And fix it. My words felt brittle, as though they might crack at any moment, but Kira reached out and took my hand anyway. Her fingers were cold, clammy against mine, but she held on. Promise? She asked, her voice a whisper of desperation. I nodded, squeezing her hand. Promise. In that moment, as we stood side by side in the kitchen that had always felt like home, I vowed to myself that I would do whatever it took to protect that cottage, to fight for that place of solace she treasured. The rest of Sunday passed in a blur of frantic emails and phone calls that went unanswered. I scoured old paperwork, searching for anything that could prove the cottage belonged to us exclusively. Deeds, wills, trust documents. I went through every file we had, but it was mostly in storage, down in our study closet. The dust on the outside of the boxes told me how long it had been since we'd laid eyes on them. I hauled them upstairs, elbows aching under the weight, and lined them across the kitchen table like a makeshift altar of our shared history. Kira hovered at the edges of the table, tracing her finger over typed lines and signatures, as though each stroke might reveal a hidden clause she'd missed. At dusk, the sky was stained lavender and rose as I watched Kira sit at the counter, head in her hands. I slid in next to her, offering her a glass of wine I'd poured because I was too restless to slow down, but she took it and held the stem like a shield. "I feel sick," she confessed, voice raw with grief. She hadn't called her mother back. I didn't think she could. That standoffish distance between them had always been a fragile thing, easily fractured by any sign of betrayal. "I trusted her," Kira said, tears spilling over finally. "I thought she'd protect this for me." I pulled her close, wrapping her in my arms as her sobs cracked the evening air. "You're not alone," I whispered. "We'll figure this out." I felt the tremor of her body against mine, and my own resolve wavered for a heartbeat. The idea that someone could swoop in and strip away the anchor of her childhood so effortlessly seemed like a personal attack on everything I believed a family should be. Later that night, after Kira fell into restless sleep, I slipped out onto our back porch, the looming bulk of the house behind me and the distant hum of the city streets below. I cradled a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold, watching as the moon rose pale and thin above the horizon. Memories of our last trip to the cottage flickered behind my closed eyes, how Kira's laughter had rippled over the water at sunrise. How we danced barefoot on the weathered deck while songbirds skittered through the pine branches. The thought that those moments could be erased with a single phone call was almost too much to bear. I stood there until the sky lightened, until the first gray fingers of dawn brushed the treetops. When I finally went back inside, Kira was still sleeping, the weight of the morning's revelation softened in the pale moonlight. I pressed a kiss to her forehead, willing myself to be her anchor even as I felt unmoored. We had until Monday, and what felt like a tidal wave of uncertainty was cresting over us, threatening to drag the life we knew under. But as I turned off the hallway light and watched Kira's chest rise and fall against the pillow, I made myself a promise. No matter what happened, I would stand by her, and I would fight for that cottage, our sanctuary, our inheritance of memory. Until there was nothing left of me to give. Monday morning arrived with a chill in the air, shards of light cutting through the fog on the driveway as we drove toward the notary's office. I looked over at Kira in the passenger seat, her face pale and determined in the early light. "We'll get it back," I whispered, reaching across and squeezing her hand. She nodded, though her eyes were dry now, set in a stare of steely resolve. Whatever lay ahead, we were facing it together. And I would not let this call be the end of everything we cared about. That was my vow, and I would keep it, no matter the cost. We hadn't visited the cottage in months. Life in the city, demanding jobs, and endless obligations kept us rooted in a world of traffic lights and concrete rather than pine needles and loons. But that place, tucked into a curve of the lake like it had grown out of the rocks, was more than just an escape. It was a promise Kira's grandfather had made. That no matter how far she drifted from the girl she once was, she'd always have a place to come home to. A place where the morning sun painted the water gold and the evening smelled of wood smoke and old memories. And now Gloria, with her careless phone call and her high-handed demands, threatened to erase all of that like it was just another asset to be sold off for cash. The drive felt longer than usual, even though I knew every curve of that winding road by heart. The car hummed beneath us, its tires crunching over gravel where the asphalt ended, but Kira barely seemed to notice. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, where the lake peeked out between the trees, a sliver of promise in a world that suddenly felt like it was slipping from her grasp. I glanced at her hands, fingers clenched in her lap, knuckles white, the diamond on her wedding ring catching the sun like a sharp reminder of everything we'd built together. "We're going to fix this," I said, but the words felt thin in the space between us, a desperate whisper against the roar of fear that filled the car. When we pulled up to the cottage, I felt a shiver of relief. It still looked the same, weathered siding, green-trimmed windows, and that crooked chimney that had always felt like it was leaning in to listen. I could almost smell the damp wood and the tang of old pine needles. But the moment Kira stepped out of the car, I saw it in her eyes. A fear that the place she'd always considered safe had already been violated. "Come on," I said, taking her hand as we crossed the porch. The key felt cool in my palm, the metal clicking in the lock like a sound from another life. Inside, everything looked familiar. The mismatched furniture, the sun-faded curtains, the woven rug her grandfather had brought back from some dusty market decades ago. But there was a tension in the air, a kind of wrongness that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I started searching, moving from room to room with a focus I didn't even realize I had. Drawers, cabinets, every file box in the small storage closet by the fireplace. Kira followed me silently, her eyes darting around like she was afraid something might jump out at her. And then, at the bottom of a filing cabinet, I found a manila folder that shouldn't have been there. Inside were glossy real estate brochures with bright, smiling faces and bold promises of lakeside luxury in a typeface that felt like an insult. A stack of printed offer letters, some with amounts scrawled in the margins, sat beneath them. And at the bottom, a draft contract, complete with a signature that claimed to be Kira's. I held it up, feeling a cold fury spread through me as I recognized the shaky imitation of her handwriting. She'd never signed something like that. Especially not without telling me. "Kira," I said, my voice tight. She moved closer, I scanning the page before locking onto mine. "That's not me," she whispered. Her voice cracked on the last word, like something inside her had finally broken. "That's not me." I turned the document over, looking for any sign that might explain how Gloria had gotten hold of it. A notary's stamp on the last page, but the ink looked smudged, the signature a scrawl that might have been written by anyone. "She forged it," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "She forged your name. She's trying to sell this place right out from under us." Kira reached for the contract, her fingers trembling as she traced the letters of her name. Letters that weren't hers at all. "Why?" she asked, her voice small, like a child's. Why would she do this? I didn't have an answer. I'd always thought of Gloria as complicated, demanding, overbearing at times, but never cruel. She'd raised Kira alone after her father died, working long hours at jobs that seemed to drain the life out of her. I'd always assumed that somewhere underneath the sharp edges was a woman who loved her daughter fiercely. But now, holding that forged contract, I wasn't so sure. "We need to call a lawyer," I said, my voice firm. "And we need to confront her. This isn't something we can just walk away from." Kira nodded, though her eyes were glassy, unfocused, like she was drifting in and out of a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. I put the papers back in the folder, tucking it under my arm like it was the most precious thing in the world. "We'll take it with us," I said. "Proof she's lying. Proof she can't do this." But even as I spoke, a heavy weight settled in my chest. Because no matter how solid the proof, this was her mother we were talking about. Family. The word felt foreign now, its edges jagged and unfamiliar. Kira let out a shaky breath, her shoulders slumping as though the fight had already drained her. "What if it's already too late?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if she's already signed everything and the buyers think they own it?" I reached for her hand, feeling the cold sweat on her palm. "Then we fight," I said. "We fight until they know the truth. Until we get it back." Outside, the sun had begun its slow descent behind the pines, casting long shadows that crawled across the porch. The lake glistened like molten gold, the water lapping at the dock in a slow, steady rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. Kira stepped onto the deck, her eyes sweeping the familiar horizon, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the girl she'd been, the one who ran barefoot across this dock with her grandfather's fishing rod in hand, laughter echoing across the water. But then the moment passed, and the weight of everything her mother had done settled back onto her shoulders. "We have to go," I said softly. "We'll find a lawyer, get the papers in order. Monday is coming, and we have to be ready." She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, and together we stepped off the porch, the boards creaking beneath us like old bones. As I locked the door, I felt a promise ignite in my chest, one that I would keep no matter what Gloria had planned. Because this place wasn't hers to sell. It was Kira's. And I would make sure she kept it, no matter how far I had to go to make that happen. Monday morning arrived with the kind of sharp, gray light that made the world look like it hadn't decided if it was worth waking up at all. We parked a block from the notary's office, the building a squat, utilitarian structure with tinted windows that reflected our anxious faces. Kira hadn't spoken much on the drive. She'd sat beside me, clutching the manila folder to her chest like it might dissolve if she let it go. Every now and then, her thumb rubbed the edge of the folder, a small motion that seemed to steady her when nothing else could. I reached over and squeezed her hand before we stepped out, feeling the cold sweat on her palm. "We've got this," I told her, though my voice felt hollow in my chest. She nodded, but her eyes darted around like she expected the world to come crashing down at any moment. Inside, the notary's office was all polished wood and too bright lighting, the kind of place that made you feel like you should whisper, even if there wasn't anyone else around. Gloria was already there, sitting at the long table that looked like it had hosted 1,000 signings before ours. She was dressed like she was headed to a funeral. Black suit, pearls at her throat, her hair pinned into a tight bun that didn't allow for any expression at all. Her purse was propped on the table, her hands folded neatly on top of it. If you didn't know better, you'd think she was the picture of respectability. I could see the tension in her shoulders, though, the slight twitch of her fingers as we entered. She didn't even look up. Beside her sat the buyers. A young couple who looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine spread for successful professionals. Reed wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than my first car, his hair gelled back with an arrogant sheen. Talia had the kind of icy confidence that comes from getting what you want, always. They were flipping through glossy photos of the cottage, eyes alight with the promise of their new lakeside escape. I felt my stomach twist at the thought of them lounging on our dock, sipping their overpriced wine, claiming the memories Kira and I had built there. The notary was an older man with a halo of white hair and a no-nonsense expression. He looked up as we entered, peering at us over his glasses like he'd been expecting a drama to unfold. "Ah, Mr. and Mrs. Green," he said, his voice measured, polite. "Please, have a seat." Kira clutched my hand so tightly it hurt as we sat down across from Gloria. I could see her trying to steady her breath, the folder shaking just a little. I took it from her and placed it on the table, its presence like a silent challenge. Gloria's lips twitched into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I've taken care of everything," she said, her voice sweet, almost maternal. "Kira, darling, all you have to do is sign." She gestured to the stack of papers in front of the notary. "It's best for everyone." Her tone carried the weight of finality, as though the decision had already been made and we were just the footnotes. But I wasn't having any of it. I leaned forward, my voice cold and steady. "She's not signing anything." Gloria's eyes narrowed, her composure cracking for just a moment. "This is in Kira's best interest," she said sharply. "You don't understand the situation." The notary shifted in his seat, his eyes darting between us. "If there's a dispute," he began, but I cut him off. "There's no dispute," I said, lifting the folder. "There's fraud." I flipped it open and slid the forged contract across the table to him. My wife's signature was forged. She didn't agree to this sale. The notary's eyebrows shot up, and he picked up the document carefully, like it might explode in his hands. He examined it closely, his brows knitting together as he compared signatures. Reed and Talia looked up from their photos, confusion clouding their perfect features. "What is going on here?" Talia demanded, her tone sharp and brittle. Gloria opened her mouth to answer, but the notary raised a hand. "One moment," he said, his voice carrying authority. He pulled out the official ownership documents from a folder on his desk and flipped through them with deliberate care. "According to the records," he said, his voice low and even, "this property is held solely in Mrs. Green's name. There are no secondary owners listed." And he paused, squinting at the forged contract. "This signature does not match the signature on the official documents. In fact, it's markedly different." Gloria's face went pale, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the shock that rippled across her features. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Reed pushed his chair back, his eyes darting between Gloria and the notary. "We were told this was a clean deal," he said, his voice rising with anger. "We paid in advance. We were supposed to finalize today." Talia's eyes were sharp as glass as she glared at Gloria. "Is this some kind of scam?" she hissed. Gloria stood abruptly, her chair scraping across the polished floor. "This is a misunderstanding," she said, her voice trembling now. I thought it would be easier this way. She clutched her purse like it was a lifeline and glanced at us with eyes that were suddenly vulnerable. But then something shifted behind them, a flicker of desperation that turned into cold calculation. Without another word, she grabbed her purse and bolted for the door. The notary jumped up, papers fluttering in his hands. "Ma'am," he called after her, but she was gone, the door slamming behind her like a gunshot. The buyers looked stunned, their perfect plans crumbling in real time. I stood, my pulse pounding. "We're sorry you were dragged into this," I told them, though my voice was tight with fury. Reed muttered something under his breath and stormed out, Talia following close behind. The notary turned back to us, his face a mix of sympathy and disbelief. "I'll have to file a report," he said quietly. "Forgery is a serious matter." Kira sat in her chair, her hands trembling, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "We'll handle it," I said, my voice a promise. "We'll make this right." The notary nodded solemnly, gathering the forged contract and placing it carefully in a separate file. As we left the office, the morning air felt different, sharper, edged with the promise of a fight. Kira leaned into me, her step slow but sure. I could feel the weight of what we'd just discovered pressing down on us. But beneath it all, there was something else too. A spark of determination that refused to be snuffed out. Gloria might have tried to sell our future, but she hadn't counted on us standing together. And as I glanced at Kira's profile, the set of her jaw, the fierceness in her eyes, I knew one thing for certain. We weren't going to let her, or anyone else, take what was ours. Not now. Not ever. We followed her. The black SUV, sleek and ominous, trailed behind us as we left the notary's office. Gloria didn't go home, and we weren't about to let her disappear into the shadows of her lies. She was heading somewhere, and whatever that somewhere was, it couldn't be good. Kira hadn't said much since we left the notary, but I could feel the tension radiating off her like a heat wave. Every few seconds, she would glance at me, her lips pressed tight, as if she was trying to hold back the flood of emotions that threatened to break free. "Do you think she'll take us to the police?" Kira asked quietly, breaking the silence that had settled between us. Her voice was strained, uncertain, but there was a flicker of resolve beneath the fear. "What if she tries to turn it all on us?" "We'll make sure that doesn't happen," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "She can't get away with this, Kira. Not after everything she's done. We'll deal with her head on." But even as I said the words, a part of me felt the uncertainty gnaw at the edges of my thoughts. Gloria was unpredictable. We didn't know her as well as we thought, and I wasn't sure how far she would go to cover her tracks. The SUV followed us through the city streets, winding through the narrow avenues that led out of the downtown core. The further we went, the more industrial the area became. Once pristine neighborhoods turned into grimy alleys and empty lots. The air grew thicker with the scent of oil and steel, and the buildings loomed around us like abandoned giants, their glass windows shattered or boarded up, their rusted doors hanging open as if they had been forgotten by time. I recognized the area, but it felt different now. It was a place of lost promises and desperate decisions. And as we turned onto the road that led to the industrial zone, I had the sinking feeling that we were about to uncover something far darker than just a fraudulent real estate deal. Kira's grip on my hand tightened as we turned into a parking lot near a decrepit building. The words on the rusted sign read, "Metrobox Storage." It was a rundown facility with rows of old storage units, some of them with their doors ajar, others with padlocks hanging loosely as though they hadn't been used in years. Gloria's SUV rolled to a stop in front of a unit at the back of the lot. She didn't get out immediately. Instead, she sat in the car, staring straight ahead, as though trying to summon the courage to face whatever was waiting inside. We parked a few spaces away, our engine still running as I killed the headlights. The parking lot was nearly empty, and the silence felt oppressive. Kira looked at me, her face pale, her lips trembling. "This doesn't feel right, Max," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper, as if the words themselves might trigger some kind of alarm. "What is she doing here?" "I don't know," I replied. "But we're not leaving until we find out." We waited for a minute, watching the shadow of Gloria's car through the windshield. When she finally opened her door, it wasn't the hurried, panicked motion of someone trying to escape. It was slow, deliberate, as though she had already accepted that whatever was about to happen was inevitable. She slammed the door behind her with a sharp thud and walked toward the building, her heels clicking on the cracked pavement. "We need to follow her," I said quietly, reaching for the door handle. Kira nodded, and together we stepped out of the car, our footsteps muffled by the thickening fog that had rolled in from the lake. The distant sound of a train rumbled in the background, its screeching whistle an eerie soundtrack to the scene unfolding before us. We moved quietly, keeping close to the shadows of the storage units. The only light came from the pale glow of a flickering street lamp and the occasional flash of a headlight from a passing car. We stayed low, moving in sync, not wanting to draw attention to ourselves. As we crept closer, we heard voices, low, menacing tones coming from somewhere inside the building. I froze, holding my breath as the words became clearer. A man's voice, gruff and sharp, cut through the air like a knife. "You owe me, Gloria." "I don't care who you steal from," the man snarled. His voice had an edge to it that made my skin crawl. There was no mistaking the threat in his tone. I motioned for Kira to stay behind me, and we crouched behind a stack of crates, peering through the gaps to get a better view. Gloria was standing in front of a massive man, easily 6.5 feet tall, wearing a leather jacket that looked like it had seen its fair share of violence. His face was covered in a scar that ran across his cheek, the skin puckered and pale like old leather. His eyes were cold, unfeeling. He looked like the kind of man who didn't care about the rules, only the payoff. "I've waited long enough," the man growled. "You don't pay me by Friday, your daughter won't have a husband anymore." Gloria trembled, her body shaking, but she didn't back down. Her voice was soft, almost pleading. "I almost sold it," she said, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. They were this close to signing. "Just give me a little more time." Kira gasped softly beside me, her fingers gripping my arm. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Gloria wasn't just trying to sell the cottage for money. She was trying to use it as leverage to escape something far worse. I could feel the anger boiling up inside me, rising like a tide. The realization hit me hard. Gloria had put us in the middle of a much bigger mess than I had ever imagined. This wasn't just a real estate scam. This was something far more dangerous, something that had the potential to destroy everything we cared about. "We have to stop this," Kira whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She gripped my arm harder, her nails digging into my skin. "We can't just let her do this. We can't let him win." I nodded, my mind already racing with possibilities. We couldn't let this man, Victor, intimidate us any longer. We needed answers, and we needed them fast. But before I could take a step forward, Gloria's voice broke through the tension. "I'll do it," she said, her tone resigned. "I'll make the deal. I'll sell the cottage." My heart stopped. Kira's hand flew to her mouth, her breath catching in her throat. I felt the weight of the decision she was making, one that could cost us everything, and I knew we had to act fast. We couldn't let this happen. Not now. Not ever. As Gloria turned to walk toward the storage unit's entrance, I made my move. I stood up from behind the crates, my heart pounding in my chest. It was time to confront her. The moment of truth was here. We stepped out from the shadows, and Gloria's gasp sliced the air like a blade. Her eyes widened, her lips parting in shock as she nearly dropped her phone. The man, Victor, turned his head sharply toward us, his gaze landing on me first, then sliding to Kira, whose breath quickened beside me. He looked even more imposing up close. A mountain of a man with that scar on his cheek that made his face look permanently twisted in anger. His leather jacket creaked as he shifted his weight, and the chain around his neck glinted under the single bear bulb that hung from the ceiling. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice a low growl that rumbled in his chest like distant thunder. He took a step forward, his boots scraping against the concrete floor of the storage unit. I swallowed hard, squaring my shoulders and stepping in front of Kira. My voice felt too quiet at first, but I forced strength into it. "We're the people you're threatening," I said, "and you're going to back off. Now." Victor let out a bark of laughter, short and sharp, that echoed off the metal walls. "Is that so?" he sneered. He crossed his arms, the motion making the leather stretch tight over his massive biceps. "And what exactly are you planning to do to stop me, little man?" His eyes glittered dangerously, like a predator who'd just found his next meal. Gloria's lips trembled as she tried to find her voice. "Victor, please," she said, her tone wavering between panic and exhaustion. They have nothing to do with this. I just need a little more time." Her eyes darted to me, pleading, but there was something else there too, shame. A mother's shame that she'd dragged her own daughter and me into a web of her own making. But Victor wasn't even looking at her anymore. His eyes were locked on me, cold and calculating. "Oh, but they do have something to do with this," he said slowly. "Because I know exactly who you are." He lifted his chin, smirking. "You're the husband. The one who's supposed to be the white knight, protecting his precious family. Cute." He turned his gaze to Kira, his stare making my skin crawl. "And you must be the daughter. The one whose signature your dear mommy forged. He clicked his tongue, shaking his head with mock disappointment. Family, huh? Always the easiest ones to betray. Kira's breath hitched, and she reached for my hand, her fingers ice cold. You leave her out of this, I spat, stepping closer. My pulse roared in my ears, but I wasn't about to let this thug intimidate us. Victor arched an eyebrow, amused, and unfolded his arms, his hands balling into fists at his sides. He was bigger than me, stronger, probably, but I had something he didn't. The truth, and I wasn't afraid to use it. You've been blackmailing her, I said, my voice rising. You threatened her to force a sale that wasn't even hers to make. That's extortion. Fraud. We can take this to the police. I saw the flicker in his eyes then, the tiniest shift that told me he knew I was right. But it lasted only a second before his expression hardened again. The police, he mocked, his lips twisting into a grin that made my stomach turn. Do you really think the police are going to help you? People like me don't get caught because we're careful. And besides, he added, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr, even if they did catch me, I'd make sure to take a little something with me on the way down. He jerked his chin toward Kira. A pretty wife like that? I bet she'd make a fine bargaining chip. Kira gasped, and I felt her whole body tense behind me. Fury surged through me, bright and blinding, and I stepped forward until I was nearly nose to nose with him. You come near her, I said, my voice low and lethal, and I will make sure you never threaten anyone again. My hands clenched at my sides, itching for a fight I wasn't sure I could win. But I wasn't going to let him see that. I wasn't going to let him see any fear. Victor held my gaze for a long, tense moment. The scar on his cheek twitched as if it had a life of its own. Then he snorted, a derisive laugh that filled the small space like smoke. You've got guts, he said. I'll give you that. But guts don't pay the bills. He turned back to Gloria, his voice snapping like a whip. You have until Friday, he growled. No more games. No more delays. Or your daughter and her hero husband find out just how far I'll go. He jabbed a finger at Kira, his eyes gleaming. And trust me, sweetheart, you don't want that. Gloria's knees buckled, and she sank against a stack of boxes, her breath coming in ragged sobs. Please, Victor, she begged, tears streaming down her face. I'll get it. I'll get it all. Her desperation tore at me, but it didn't change what she'd done. She'd betrayed us, but she was still Kira's mother, and no matter how furious I was, I couldn't let this monster hurt her. Kira clung to me, her shoulders shaking, her face pale but resolute. I could see the strength building in her eyes, the same strength that had carried her through every hardship life had thrown her way. Let's go, I whispered to her, guiding her back toward the exit. My heart thundered in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. We're not playing his game. We're going to find another way. Victor didn't move to stop us. He just watched us leave, his smile cold and satisfied, like a cat watching a mouse scurry from the trap, knowing it had nowhere to run. Outside, the air was thick with tension. The fog had deepened, curling around the buildings like ghostly fingers. Kira turned to me, her eyes burning. We have to stop him, Max, she said, her voice trembling but determined. We can't let him hurt us or Mom. I pulled her into my arms, pressing a kiss to her forehead. We will, I promised, my own resolve hardening like steel. We'll bring him down. Together. I glanced back at the warehouse door, the darkness behind it swallowing any light that dared to enter. Victor's threat hung heavy in the air, a promise of violence that made my blood run cold. But as I held Kira close, I knew one thing for certain, this fight wasn't just about the cottage anymore. It was about family, about trust, about standing up to the kind of fear that could tear a person apart from the inside out. And I wasn't going to let that happen. Not to us. Not to her. Not ever. We stepped into the light, every step echoing with a conviction I'd never known I possessed. Gloria's face was a mixture of shock and guilt, her eyes widening like a cornered animal as she nearly dropped her phone. Her mouth opened, but no words came out, just the ragged sound of her breath. Kira's hand tightened in mine, her nails digging into my palm, a silent plea not to let go. I met Gloria's gaze head-on, the anger and confusion that had built inside me over the past few days erupting like a dam breaking. You forged Kira's name, I said, my voice hard but steady. You lied to buyers. Lied to us. Why? My chest rose and fell in rapid bursts, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me like a lead blanket. Gloria's shoulders sagged, her carefully crafted mask crumbling in real time. Her lips trembled as she tried to form words, but for a moment, All that came out was a strangled sound, a cross between a sob and a gasp. She pressed a hand to her forehead, as if trying to ward off a migraine that had been building for years. I didn't know what else to do, she finally said, her voice small and broken. Her eyes darted to Kira, her daughter's face etched with disbelief and hurt. I thought I could fix it. I thought. She stopped, swallowing hard, tears welling up and spilling down her cheeks in fat, silent drops. Fix what? I demanded, my voice sharp. You stole from your own daughter. You tried to sell the one place she's always felt safe. For what? Money? Revenge? What? My anger vibrated through my bones, but beneath it was a trembling disbelief, a desperation to understand how the woman who'd given Kira life could betray her so thoroughly. I looked at Kira, whose face was pale, her lips pressed together to keep them from trembling. Her eyes glistened in the harsh overhead light. Mom, she whispered, her voice cracking. How could you do this to me? Gloria shook her head, wiping at her tears with a trembling hand. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said, her voice trembling. I swear to God, Kira, I never wanted this. I made some bad investments. The market was down, and her voice trailed off, her face contorted with shame. I borrowed money to try and cover it, but the interest, Victor, he's like a leech. He kept adding fees and penalties and threats. She broke down then, her knees giving way as she sank to the cold cement floor, her sobs echoing off the walls like a confession. I didn't tell you because I was ashamed and afraid. I thought I could fix it myself. I thought if I sold the cottage, I could pay him off and you'd never have to know. Kira's eyes flooded with tears, her breath hitching in her chest. She crouched down, reaching for her mother's hands. Mom, she whispered, her voice filled with a hurt so raw it felt like a wound. You should have told me. You should have come to us. We would have helped you. Her voice broke on the last word, and I saw the fierce strength in her eyes, a strength that reminded me of every time she'd picked herself up after a loss, every time she'd smiled through disappointment. You didn't have to do this alone. Gloria looked up at her daughter, her eyes rimmed red. I didn't want you to think I was weak, she said. I didn't want you to know how much I'd messed up. I thought I could save the cottage in the end. But it all got away from me. She pressed a trembling hand to her lips, her shoulders shaking. I lied to you. I lied to everyone. And I'm so sorry. Kira glanced at me, and in that look was every silent conversation we'd had over the years. Trust me, we're in this together, no matter what. I stepped forward and crouched beside them, my voice low but steady. You betrayed us, Gloria, I said. The words felt heavy, final, but I didn't flinch from them. You put us in danger, but we're not walking away. You're going to tell us everything. Every detail about Victor, the debt, the threats, everything. My jaw clenched as I fought to keep my fury in check, because we can't fight what we don't understand. Gloria's eyes widened, hope flickering in their depths. She nodded slowly, as though she couldn't quite believe she wasn't being cast out into the darkness she'd created for herself. Okay, she whispered. I'll tell you everything. We guided her over to an old metal chair near the wall, and Kira fetched her a bottle of water from the car. Gloria took it with shaking hands, her fingers rattling against the plastic. It started 3 years ago, she began, her voice hoarse but growing stronger with each word. I invested in a property deal that was supposed to flip fast, a quick turnaround, the guy said. But the market crashed, and I couldn't sell. I owed the contractor money, but he disappeared, leaving me with debts I couldn't pay. That's when Victor showed up. Her lips quivered, her eyes darting to the floor. At first, it seemed like he was just another lender. He said he could help me consolidate my debt, give me a chance to get ahead. But then the fees started piling up. Late fees. Interest rates that made no sense. Every month, he demanded more. And when I couldn't pay, he started threatening me. She took a shaky breath, her gaze darting to Kira. He said he knew about the cottage, that if I didn't pay up, he'd come after you and Max. He said. Her voice faltered, but she forced herself to continue. He said accidents happen. Fires. Robberies. I believed him, Kira. I was so scared. I thought if I sold the cottage, I could pay him off and keep you safe. Kira's eyes filled with fresh tears. Mom, we would have helped you, she whispered. You didn't have to go through this alone. She reached for her mother's hand, squeezing it tightly. But now we have to face this together. No more lies. No more secrets. Gloria nodded, her chin trembling. I understand, she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. I'll help you any way I can. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. Please don't hate me. I thought I was doing the right thing. I met her gaze, the anger in my chest slowly giving way to something heavier, something that felt like pity and regret, and maybe even forgiveness, though I wasn't sure I was ready to call it that yet. We don't hate you, I said, my voice firm. But we can't trust you blindly anymore either. We're going to fix this, but you're going to have to earn that trust back, one step at a time. Kira nodded, wiping her tears on the sleeve of her jacket. One step at a time, she echoed, her voice filled with a quiet strength that made my heart swell with pride. She looked back at her mother, her expression resolute. We're in this together now, Mom. All of us. And we're going to bring Victor down. In that moment, I saw the faintest flicker of hope in Gloria's eyes, a light that said maybe, just maybe, redemption was possible. And though the road ahead felt impossibly long, I knew we'd walk it together. For the cottage. For our family. And for the trust we'd fight to rebuild, no matter how many lies we had to untangle along the way. We left the warehouse in a haze of exhaustion, Kira's hand trembling in mine, Gloria trailing behind us like a shadow. The air felt heavy, like it carried the weight of all the truths we'd just unearthed, and every step toward the car felt like wading through mud. Kira's eyes were red from crying, but there was a fire there too, a determination that reminded me of why I fell in love with her in the first place. What do we do now? She asked, her voice raw. The question wasn't just for me, it was for both of us. The fight was ours to shoulder together. Gloria slipped into the back seat without a word, her posture hunched like someone bracing for a storm. I glanced at her in the mirror, seeing not just the woman who'd betrayed us, but the mother who'd tried to shield her daughter the only way she knew how, even if it meant forging signatures and selling memories. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it made me understand her a little better, and that understanding was its own kind of burden. We find money, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Fast. We pay Victor off or find a way to bring him down. Either way, we can't let him get to us first. The thought of Victor's threat, your daughter won't have a husband anymore, made my skin crawl. He was the kind of man who didn't make idle threats. He'd already dragged Gloria into his web. He'd come for us too if we let him. Kira turned toward me, her hand finding mine again, her grip strong. But how, Max? We don't have that kind of money. Mom's already pawned everything. Her voice cracked on the last word, the despair seeping through the cracks of her strength. What are we going to do? I stared out the windshield at the darkened street, the city lights blurring into smears of gold and red. Then it hit me, the one person who might have the means and the motive to help us. Robert, I said, the name tasting unfamiliar on my tongue. Gloria's older brother, Kira's uncle. A man we'd only seen once in the last decade, at a funeral where he'd stood at the edge of the crowd like a ghost. We go to Robert. Gloria flinched in the back seat, a small, almost imperceptible motion, but I caught it. She'd always refused to talk about him, muttering something about bad blood and stubborn pride. But now that pride seemed like a luxury none of us could afford. He's family, I continued. He might hate what you've done, Gloria, but he won't let Victor destroy Kira's life. I have to believe that. Kira nodded slowly, the faintest glimmer of hope in her eyes. Do you think he'll help? She asked, her voice trembling. Gloria stayed silent, staring at her hands, but I saw the resignation in her eyes. If he's anything like the man your grandfather said he was, I said, he will. I left them at home, promising I'd call as soon as I spoke to Robert. The drive to his ranch was long, the darkness pressing in on all sides like a living thing. My mind raced with every mile. What if he slammed the door in my face? What if he laughed at me? But I pushed those fears down, focusing instead on the woman waiting for me to bring her a miracle. The ranch appeared out of the darkness like an oasis, the porch light casting a warm glow on the gravel drive. I parked and climbed out, my heart thudding in my chest. The front door opened before I even reached it, and there he was, Robert. Tall, broad-shouldered, the same steel-gray hair I remembered, though now it had thinned a bit. His eyes were sharp, calculating, but there was a flicker of recognition as he took in my face. Max, he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. Didn't expect to see you here. He stepped aside, motioning me in. The house smelled of old wood and leather, and a fire crackled in the hearth. He gestured toward the worn leather couch. Sit. Tell me what's going on. I sank onto the couch, the cushion sighing beneath me. My hands felt too big, too clumsy, as I fumbled with the manila folder I'd brought. The evidence of Gloria's betrayal, the forged signature, the contracts. Robert watched me with a patient, almost clinical detachment. When I finished, his brow furrowed, and he let out a low whistle. That woman, he muttered, more to himself than to me. Always thought she could fix everything herself. His gaze lifted to mine, steady and unwavering. So let me get this straight, he said. She forged Kira's signature to sell the cottage, tried to pay off some thug, and now he's threatening both of you if he doesn't get his money. He leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. And she didn't think to come to me. The hurt in his voice was subtle, but it was there, a tremor beneath the anger. She was scared, I said quietly, and ashamed. She thought she could handle it. Robert snorted. She never could handle anything alone. He rubbed a hand across his face, the lines around his eyes deepening. Family means something, Max. It always has. Even when it's messy. Even when it's broken. He stood and crossed to a small safe tucked into the bookshelf. The dial clicked under his fingers, and he pulled out a checkbook. How much does she owe? He asked, his tone matter of fact. 60 grand, I said, the number like a stone in my chest. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't flinch. Consider it done. He scribbled the amount, ripped the check free, and pressed it into my hand. Tell Gloria I don't hate her, he said. Just disappointed. But I'm not letting some lowlife take down my family. I stood, the check feeling like a lifeline. Thank you, I said, my voice thick with relief. Robert nodded. You get that bastard off your backs, he said, his eyes hard. And if he comes back, you call me. I'll handle it. The steel in his tone left no doubt that he meant every word. As I drove home, the check resting on the passenger seat like a promise, I felt a strange mix of gratitude and dread. Gratitude that we had a chance now, that we weren't alone. Dread because Victor wouldn't go down without a fight. And as I glanced in the rearview mirror, the dark shape of a black SUV appeared behind me, headlights glaring. My stomach dropped. Victor wasn't going to let us go that easily. I tightened my grip on the wheel, my mind racing. We had the money, but we also had a target on our backs. Victor was coming, and this time, he'd be out for blood. I got home with the check from Robert in my pocket, the edges already worn from where I'd clutched it too tightly on the drive. Kira met me at the door, her eyes wide with hope and fear. Did he help? She asked, voice trembling. I nodded, pressing the folded paper into her palm. 60 grand, I said. Relief washed over her face, and for a moment she looked like the woman I'd fallen in love with, strong, determined, unstoppable. But the darkness in her eyes remained. What about Victor? She asked. He's not going to just let us walk away, is he? I shook my head. No, he's not. But we're going to make sure he has no choice. I called Marla Jex, the private investigator Kira's friend had recommended. I'd met her once. A short, wiry woman with sharp eyes and a voice that made even the bravest man pause before crossing her. She picked up on the first ring. Max, she said, her tone brisk. What's the update? I explained everything in a low voice. Victor's threats, the forged signature, the way he'd cornered Gloria in that warehouse. I could almost hear her smirk on the other end of the line. Classic intimidation, she said. He's been doing this kind of thing for years. Extortion, fraud, strong-arming small business owners. The best part? He's got an open warrant, aggravated assault. We can use that. My heart lifted a little. How? I asked. Lure him out, she said. Somewhere public. Gloria calls him, says she's got the money. We tip the cops. They're dying to pick him up. She paused, her voice dropping. But make sure he thinks it's real. If he even suspects it's a trap, he'll bolt. Or worse. The weight of her words settled on me. Victor was dangerous. A cornered animal. But I couldn't let that stop us. I owed it to Kira, to Gloria, to everyone he'd threatened. That night, Kira sat with Gloria at the kitchen table. I stood by the window, phone pressed to my ear, listening as Marla coordinated with the local police. They're in, she confirmed. Uniforms nearby, plain clothes in the park. The second he makes a move for that money, they'll take him down. Just make sure Gloria doesn't lose her nerve. I glanced at the table, where Gloria's hands trembled around her coffee mug. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, the lines around her eyes deepening with each passing hour. Kira squeezed her mother's hand. You can do this, she said softly. For us. For yourself. Gloria nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. I owe you both that much, she whispered. I knelt beside her, meeting her gaze. Call him, I said. Tell him you have the money. Set the time and place. She took a shaky breath, picked up her phone, and dialed. I could hear the low hum of the line, the static crackling like a threat. Victor, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. I have the money. 60,000. I can meet you tomorrow, 3 o'clock. Larchwood Park. Her eyes darted to mine, seeking reassurance. I nodded. She continued. But this is the last time, Victor. After this, we're done. Silence stretched, and then his voice, low and menacing, filled the space between us all. If this is a trap, he growled, I'll end it with blood. He hung up. Gloria dropped the phone, her hands shaking. Kira wrapped her arms around her mother, tears shining in her eyes. I took a breath, feeling the adrenaline coil tight in my chest. It's set, I said. Tomorrow at Larchwood Park. 3 o'clock. I glanced at Marla, who had arrived just in time to catch the tail end of the call. She nodded, her expression fierce. I'll be there. Plainclothes units in the park, watching every angle. He won't get away. Her gaze sharpened. But you need to be prepared. If he senses anything's off, he could turn violent. Keep your distance until the cops move in. I nodded. We're ready, I said. But even as I spoke, doubt gnawed at the edges of my mind. Victor was cunning. He'd gotten away with this kind of thing before. And this time, he had everything to lose. As the night stretched on, I sat at the kitchen table with Kira, the weight of what we were about to do pressing down on both of us. She reached across the table, her fingers twining with mine. You think it'll work? She asked. I stared at her hand in mine, the promise of everything we'd built together. It has to, I said. It's the only way to end this. Outside, the night was silent, the city holding its breath. We were too far in to turn back now. And as I closed my eyes, I made a silent vow. I would protect Kira, protect our home, no matter what. Even if it meant facing Victor and every demon he brought with him. Because sometimes, the only way to keep what you love is to stand in the line of fire and refuse to back down. Larchwood Park lay in the middle of the city, a manicured slice of green with carefully trimmed hedges and winding walkways that wound through flower beds and benches. It was the kind of place where people came to forget the noise of the world. Today, it felt like a trap waiting to be sprung. I stood beneath an old oak tree, watching the leaves shiver in the breeze, every muscle in my body tense with anticipation. Kira was a few feet away, her phone in hand, ready to call Marla if anything went wrong. Gloria sat on a bench in the clearing, her face pale but determined, the check clutched in her trembling fingers. I watched her chest rise and fall, each breath a struggle against the fear that had gripped her since the moment she'd agreed to this plan. Marla was here too, though you'd never know it. She blended into the scenery with a paperback in her lap, sunglasses shielding her eyes, her posture casual and unthreatening. But I knew her mind was sharp, her focus razor-edged. A pair of uniformed officers loitered by the playground at the edge of the park, their presence hidden beneath the illusion of normalcy. Every now and then, they glanced our way, waiting for the moment when all hell would break loose. Victor was late. Every second felt like an hour, the air thick with tension. Gloria shifted on the bench, her gaze darting to me, then back to the path where she expected him to appear. Her lips moved in a silent prayer, her fingers worrying the edge of the check like a talisman. He'll come, I told her, though my voice sounded more like a question than a promise. Kira stood behind her mother, one hand on her shoulder, her face a mask of worry. I knew she hated this, hated that we dragged her mother into it. But this was the only way. Victor needed to be stopped, and Gloria was the only bait he'd bite. A flicker of movement caught my eye, and my breath hitched. Victor emerged from the tree line, his leather jacket gleaming like an oil slick in the afternoon sun. He moved with the confidence of a man who'd never once been afraid of consequences. His eyes locked on Gloria, his mouth curling into a predatory smile. 60 grand, he drawled, his voice low and dangerous. You brought it. Gloria's hand shook as she held out the check. It's all here, she said, her voice quivering. Take it. Leave us alone. Victor took a slow step forward, his eyes glinting with amusement. You think this is over with a check? He sneered. You think I'd let you walk away that easy? His hand darted out, grabbing the check from her trembling fingers. That's when the sirens wailed, loud and sudden, shattering the fragile calm. Victor's head snapped up, his eyes wide with rage and fear. What he started, but the uniforms were already moving, sprinting across the grass, weapons drawn. Marla rose from her bench, her her badge out, her voice steady and cold. "Victor DuPont, you're under arrest for extortion, fraud, and aggravated assault. Don't move." For a split second, time froze. Victor's eyes locked on mine, and I saw the realization dawn there, that he'd been set up, that his threats had come back to haunt him. He lunged at me, his hand reaching for something in his jacket, maybe a knife, maybe worse. I stepped back instinctively, my pulse roaring in my ears, but before he could close the distance, the officers were on him. He swung wildly, catching one on the chin, but the other tackled him, sending them both sprawling on the grass. Kira screamed, her hands flying to her mouth. I ran to her, pulling her close as the officers fought to restrain Victor, his curses filling the air like poison. They cuffed him, his face twisted in fury, the veins in his neck bulging. He glared at me, his eyes full of hatred. "This isn't over," he spat. "You think you've won? You think you're safe?" The officers dragged him to his feet, his jacket rumpled, his hair a mess. "You'll never be safe from me." Gloria collapsed onto the bench, tears streaming down her cheeks. Kira and I sat on either side of her, our arms wrapping around her trembling shoulders. Marlo approached us, her face hard but kind. "You did the right thing," she said. "He's not getting out of this one." I nodded, my heart still racing. The adrenaline had left me shaky, but relief washed over me in slow, gentle waves. We'd done it. We'd stopped him. As the officers led Victor away, his curses echoing behind him, I looked at Kira, her eyes red but fierce. "It's over," I whispered, brushing a tear from her cheek. She shook her head. "No," she said. "It's just beginning." And she was right. The battle was won, but the scars would linger. Trust would take time to rebuild. Gloria would have to live with what she'd done. But in that moment, with the sun setting and Victor finally in cuffs, I felt hope. Hope that we could start to heal, that the cottage would be ours again, that family could mean something real, something true. We sat there in the fading light, the wind rustling the leaves overhead, the echoes of sirens fading into the night. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed we could put the pieces back together. Maybe not perfectly, but enough. Enough to build a life worth fighting for. A week later, we drove back to the cottage. The journey felt different this time, the tension that had knotted our shoulders slowly unraveling. The trees were greener, the sky brighter, or maybe it was just the weight lifted from our chests. Kira's hand rested in mine, warm and steady, and Gloria sat in the back seat, quieter than she'd ever been. She'd stayed with us for a few days after the arrest, each day marked by a new apology, a new promise that she'd make things right. We didn't forgive her overnight, but we didn't shut her out either. When we pulled into the gravel drive, the cottage stood there as it always had, weathered wood, green shutters, a place that felt like it had grown from the earth itself. It smelled of pine and damp leaves, and the lake shimmered beyond the trees, peaceful as a sleeping child. We stepped out, the crunch of gravel underfoot grounding us in a way that made the past few weeks feel like a fever dream. Kira inhaled deeply, eyes closing as if she were drawing the place into her lungs. "It's ours again," she whispered, her voice soft but sure. Inside, everything was just as we'd left it, faded curtains, the old rug by the fireplace, the wooden table where Kira's grandfather had once taught her to carve little animals out of soap. The notary had confirmed the sale was void, the buyers had gotten their money back, and the cottage was safe. It was more than a place. It was a promise that some things couldn't be stolen, no matter how hard someone tried. Gloria stood in the doorway, her fingers twisting together. "I'm so sorry," she said, voice trembling. "I never wanted to hurt you." I thought she trailed off, tears gathering in her eyes. Kira walked over, her expression complicated. A mixture of hurt, love, and something I couldn't name. "I know, Mom," she said quietly. "But you did. You hurt us. It'll take time to fix that." Gloria nodded, tears spilling over. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying," she said. I stepped out onto the porch, the wood warm beneath my feet. The sun was setting, casting the lake in gold. Kira joined me, slipping her arm around my waist. "It's ours again," she said, repeating the words like a prayer. "For good." I nodded, kissing her temple. "And no one, not even family, is taking it from us," I promised. As the evening settled, we stood there together, the scent of pine and possibility filling the air. The cottage was more than a home. It was a reminder that even when the world tried to break us, some things couldn't be sold, or stolen, or destroyed. Some things stayed. And this time, we were here to stay too.